Hello and welcome to Political Science 101, the history of the American political system. This is an online class, but I do have lectures that I teach from my home office. So today we are talking about Chapter 2, and it is the Constitutional Democracy, Promoting Liberty and Self-Government. We do have a new textbook, and it did a fantastic job of explaining some things. So we're going to go ahead and start with this. I love that it starts out with the late John McCain. So I actually saw John McCain speak in Cincinnati when he was running for president with Sarah Palin. And that was the first time I ever went to see a president, someone running for president giving, their campaign speech. I really wish I had also gone to see Obama, just because later on, in 2016, I actually went to a Trump rally and I went to a Hillary Clinton rally, and it was eye-opening and amazing, and I took notes, and the differences were just so educational. I would just recommend it to anybody to go to both. And, George Washington, who is my favorite president, and we are talking about anti-federalism and federalism in our chapters this week. George Washington refused to pick a party because he had 3 anti-federalists and 3 federalists on his presidential cabinet. He listened to both parties in entirety before he made a single decision, and he's my favorite president for that very reason. So he said a 2-party system would tear us apart, because it would pit one against the other and demonize one, and against the other. If you study more into politics, you'll find that most first world countries or developed nations actually have 4 to 6 parties. And it keeps them from the infighting that we often see. Not often, but can see in American politics, which is not a good thing. All right, so it talks about President, he was a Senator McCain. I was just telling you, I saw him when he was running. Opens up with him. He was a prisoner of war for 5 years. Really interesting, amazing story about him. I love how it opens with liberty, equality, and self-government, and how that was completely not possible in Europe. So they were trying to come up with a government that was completely unheard of anywhere else. We have limited government. We have this, what the founding fathers really wanted was a limited government and a representative government working together, but sometimes they are in conflict of one another. Instead of balancing one another. Limited government is one that is subject to strict legal limits on the uses of power so that it would not threaten the people's liberty. They sought to establish a system of a representative government as well, in which the people would govern through the selection of their representatives. One thing they were really worried about, because they had it happen to them, was where is it? They were very careful about the majority. If the majority is so into using government to get its way, it can stamp out, it can demolish, it can, wipe out the minority completely. And they did not want that. And sometimes you'll hear people say, what about, why do these, groups that are minorities, why do they have rights? Well, there's a reason. And of course, we're going to talk about civil rights and civil liberties next week. There's a reason, because oftentimes the majority has so much power that they abuse it to the point that they take away the rights of the minority. And what I always tell my students is, you look throughout history or American history, and who were the bad guys, right? You have, in the beginning, you have Native Americans, okay, supposedly. The bad guys, as we, take land from them that was not empty, it was inhabited. Then you have the British are the bad guys, and then later on you have, in different wars, you have maybe the Spanish or the German or the Japanese or or at the beginning of the 13 colonies, Catholics were kind of on the outs. Then you have, Protestants are kind of on the outs when we go through the, the witch trials and that sort of thing. So you have to be really careful, because when will your number come up where your group, ethnicity, or religious group is the minority, and you want to protect others so that someone's there to protect you. Okay, and that's really what they had in mind. All right. Careful balance. Talks about limited government. I'm having a really hard time seeing in this really bright light. Sorry. There was a power struggle, of course. Great Britain wanted the 13 colonies to pay for the French and Indian War, and there was, representation. There was no representation in taxation, and they said no way. Then you have the Boston Tea Party. Then when they talk about inalienable rights, what does that mean, inalienable rights? I love that they really explain it well. It just means natural rights that no government should ever take away, no matter what. Okay. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, or protection of property. I'm sorry. The social contract they talk about. They talk about John Locke and the social contract, giving up some rights in order for the government to protect you. And Thomas Hobbes, who was an English philosopher. He is considered the modern, he's a, modern day's political philosophy is what he came up with. And he wrote a book called The Leviathan, which I would really like to read. I haven't read it yet. I need to read that. All right. So Thomas Jefferson really used these very brilliant men to write the Declaration of Independence. So it goes on, and the Declaration of Independence was a call to a revolution. Then it talks about how you had the Articles of Confederation, were a loose confederation of states. It wasn't really, it wasn't a union, of course, just quite yet. All right. Okay, and in that Articles of Confederation, there were no taxation was available. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flip to our PowerPoint so you can see some of this. It's not a really, I wish it had more pictures. It doesn't. It's just one that they made for the textbook, but we'll go through it. And hopefully you can see me in the corner. Whoopsie. I'll move myself over here. Maybe we'll go high. All right. Okay, so it goes through limited government, representative government. We already talked about that. No taxation without representation. I'm going to move myself. I'm sorry if I'm making you dizzy. I'm going to move myself to the bottom now. Repeal the Stamp Act. We talked about that. John Locke, social contract, inalienable rights means natural rights, okay, that you shouldn't take away from anyone for any reason. The government shouldn't be allowed. He paraphrased Locke in the Declaration. All men are created equal. And of course, he left some men out. He left the slaves out. They had no voice. He left women out as well. Governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed. Okay? And it is the right of the people to alter or abolish a tyrannical government. Adopted during the Revolutionary War. Not a constitution. The Articles of Confederation, it said that it was the first constitution for America, but a fundamental law that defines how the government will legitimately operate. It wasn't really a constitution, created a weak national government. You couldn't tax. and they needed more power later on. A nation dissolving, weakness of the national government raised fears. Of course, Shays' Rebellion. I don't know if you remember reading that section. It was an army of angry citizens with pitchforks. Okay, a little scary. Okay, to prevent foreclosures of their lands. Congress was unable to raise an army to quell the rebellion. Congress was motivated to authorize a convention in Philadelphia to revise these Articles of Confederation because they needed an army to be a nation that could protect. So they were negotiating towards a constitution. They drafted the constitution that created an entirely new form of government. The government must be granted the amount of power that is necessary to carry out its responsibilities. We have the Virginia plan and we have the New Jersey plan. And you know what? I see over and over in political science, in the history of political science, and the history of, the American political system is compromise. And we've gotten away from that. You don't get what you want. You compromise where you give a little to the other side. It's called a balance. You don't always get what you want. So we have the Virginia plan, large states, and that was the Senate, 2 from every state. Greater power by the larger states. That would be the House of Representatives. So that's based on the population. And then the New Jersey plan was a smaller state, and they would have 2 representatives to the Senate. So it would be equal, and then one that was greater based on population. The Great Compromise. All right. Great idea. The 3/5 compromise, not a great idea, where the enslaved population counted for 3/5 of a person, which I still really don't get. Right, because they wanted more political power. All right, here we have a great graph of percentage of state population, 1790. Okay, that's in your book. Delegates establish their own ratification process. New constitution would be submitted directly to the states for approval. It would become law if approved by at least 9. Anti-federalists, those who were against a strong national government, raised arguments that still echo in American politics today. That would be the Republican Party, and today. And then the Federalists were supporters of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay were the ones who wrote the Federalist Papers. You will be reading one this week for your discussion. I think it's 78, but they did mention in your book that number 10 is the most famous and was maybe the most brilliant essay on politics in American history written by James Madison. So they had some great quotes from it this week as well. And of course, it was written anonymously. It was said it was written by Publius. Okay, and but actually, these 3 men wrote it to convince those to vote for the Constitution. The framers' goals: government strong enough to meet the country's needs for defense and commerce, government that would not threaten the existence of separate states, government that was restricted in its lawful uses of power, limited government, government that gave the people a voice in their governance, representative government. Okay, list of primary goals of the framers. Okay, we just went over that. A government that would not, strong enough to meet the nation's needs. Okay, a government that would not threaten existence, separate states, through elections. Number 3, a government that would not threaten liberty. An objective sought through an elaborate system of checks and balances. A government based on a popular consent. Okay, and they also had indirect elections of different public officials. Protecting liberty. Liberty was the governing ideal they sought most. Individuals should be free to act and think as they choose, provided they do not infringe unreasonably on the freedom and well-being of others. They mistrusted unrestricted majority rule, and they should, because of where they came from, where they started. It's crazy to me. The Pilgrims come over here because they were religiously persecuted, and it's crazy because it doesn't take them long to set up rules that say if you don't come to church, you're going to be stoned to death. So you come from religious persecution, and instead of changing, they actually set it back up again, okay? So there was really good reason why they needed to protect against this. Grants of power, denials of power to national government, powers expressed denied to national and state. Constitution was made difficult to amend. Using power to offset power. So they had the separation of powers. And this is where Madison Federalist number 10 discussed the problem of overbearing majorities. Very scary if we let the majority run rampant. Yes. He had a great quote in there that I wanted to talk about. A really good quote. James Madison. I believe it was right here. It's on the top of page 43. You guys have digital e-textbooks, so I'm not sure. It says, liberty should be equally exposed to danger whether the government has too much or too little power. There is a sweet spot, and it needs to stay right there. And you know what? That's just super profound. All right, let's keep going. Grants of power, separate institutions, the three branches, executive, judicial, and legislative. You guys know this. Denials of power, Bill of Rights. They wanted those 10 amendments for these undeniable or unalienable rights, natural rights. Judicial review, Marbury versus Madison, when Thomas Jefferson did not want to listen to, the judges that were kind of appointed but not carried through yet. Power of voters to remove officials from office. Oh, sorry. My lights just flickered. Separate institution sharing power. That was made up by a historian in your book. Richard Neustadt, a political scientist, not a historian, sorry. Political science made this up, or came up with this theory. Separate branches interlocked in such a way, an elaborate system of checks and balance. Shared legislative powers, Congress checked by the President and the Supreme Court. Shared executive power, President checked by Congress and Supreme Court. Shared judicial powers, courts checked by the President and the Congress. We have this lovely branch. Supreme Court over the President. No one is above the law, and that's what Marbury versus Madison really foretold. And that is where the judicial review comes in. Supreme Court over Congress. They can declare acts of Congress unconstitutional. Congress over the President may impeach and remove the President, may override his veto. Congress over the Supreme Court decide to seize the federal court system, the number of Supreme Court justice, appellate court, President over Congress may veto acts. Okay, he can have laws enacted by Congress. He can have some executive orders as well. President over the Supreme Court. He nominates federal judges. Okay. Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, trial by jury of one's peers, and legal counsel, freedom of religion. Not just your religion, freedom of religion, period. Judicial review, and we there's a great section explaining this. Chief Justice John Marshall, the power of the judiciary to decide whether a government official or institution has acted within the limits of the Constitution. So that makes it to where the president isn't above the law. Super important. To the framers, the risk of popular vote was tyranny of the majority, okay? They were afraid of the French Revolution, okay? Because there were a lot of uneducated people running rampant. And then you have the reign of terror in France where they're cutting off heads. They did not want that to happen, okay? Unfettered democracies have been spectacles of turbulence and contention. He's basically saying, France, basically. Framers nevertheless believed the people deserved and required a voice in the government, but they wanted to balance it. And that's why we have the Electoral College democracy versus republic. Democracy to the framers, a government in which the majority has absolute power. That's from Greece, where the citizens, who were men with land, got to vote every single thing, every single week, every single issue. The framers preferred a concept of a republic with representatives. Majority rule in a republic is limited in order to protect minority rights. It's really important. And what I get really tired of hearing is the majority complaining. They have the power, okay? They have the power. You don't know when you'll be the minority, and you have to be so careful. And that's where I think empathy is really lost, where people go, oh, if I was that religion, I would want to be left alone and be able to, worship as I please. Some places in history where we really messed up, okay, and we did not protect the minority. The Quakers were, that's in your textbook as well, talking about the Quakers and where they were actually kind of punished in the Revolutionary War because they were anti-war, okay, and that's their religious belief, all right? Obviously, the slaves had no voice. The Japanese internment camps, Native Americans, and that sort of thing. But there have been times where we have messed up majorly, okay? And that's why you have to insert, walk a mile and they, in someone else's shoes and think, if they're not hurting anyone, why does it matter exactly? Okay, what else do we have? Okay, limited popular rule. Here we have the Electoral College, where each state gets to decide. And there's only been 4 times where presidents have been elected and they have not won the popular vote. And they had a list of those, which was pretty cool, actually. They lost the popular vote, but they won the Electoral College because each state gets to decide. So Rutherford B. Hayes won, but actually Tilden, so Hayes was a Republican, Tilden actually was a Democrat, and he had the popular vote, but not the Electoral College. Benjamin Harrison won, but actually Grover Cleveland had the popular vote. George W. Bush actually had the Electoral College, and Al Gore had the popular vote. And then Donald Trump, he had the Electoral College, but actually Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. So it happens 4 times in our history. Okay. Keep going. Finish up. Okay. Terms of service. 4 years president, 6 years senator, 2 years representative, federal judge, infinite with good behavior that can be impeached if they do something that's illegal. Altering the Constitution, more power to the people, really hard to alter it. Jeffersonian democracy, government belonged to all, not just elite. Jacksonian democracy urged states to award electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote. Progressives championed the primary elections to get rid of the boss system and, the hoarding of power by corporations, which we really have trouble today because I believe in chapter 1 it talked about almost 70% of lobbyists are corporation controlled. So it's not the people aren't ruling the government, it's the corporations, the elite and the wealthy. Okay. How the 50 states differ, direct democracy, the initiative, and popular referendum. Constitutional democracy today. And that's actually one of your quiz questions. Type of government created in 1787 might best be called a constitutional democratic republic. I know before we would call it a democratic republic, but they want to put the constitutional in front of it. And actually, I think that this is actually a better adjective for sure. All right. Divided branches, staggered terms of office, separate constituencies. All right, here's some things to think about. Define the concept of judicial review. How does a court decision involving judicial review differ from an ordinary court decision? court decision, such as a ruling in a case involved armed robbery. Contrast the original system of electing federal officials with the system today, noting in each case how voters acquired a more direct voice in elections process that was originally the case. Why is it more accurate to say that the United States has a system of separated institutions sharing power rather than a system of separated powers? Provide examples of how shared power can act to check and balance the power of each institution. I really like the new term. And that's a great question to think about. Okay, any other questions? All right, let's go pull this back up, and hopefully that will help you understand Chapter 2, and have a great night.